Hello and welcome to our video on Pythagoras Theorem. Pythagoras Theorem says that the sum of the squares of the two shorter sides of a right-angled triangle equals the square of the hypotenuse. Now there's a few words in there. First one I want to point out is for Pythagoras Theorem to work, it must be a right-angled triangle. And you can tell if a triangle, you can tell if a triangle is right-angled by looking at this little box in the corner there. We need to work out what's this hypotenuse. If you recall, hypotenuse is the longest side. And hypotenuse, when we're using Pythagoras theorem, hypotenuse is always labelled as C. So we've got this C here as well. It's really important that you always remember that the hypotenuse, the longest side, is C. Otherwise the theorem doesn't work. I've also put a bit of information here that if you're asked to write an answer using exact values, so not using your calculator and not getting a decimal approximation, then you can just leave your answer with a square root sign. For example, square root of 3 or square root of any number. Okay, I've got some steps down here and an example we're going to use to go through the first set of steps. When you're solving problems involving Pythagoras, you need to first of all identify that it is a right-angled triangle and that the problem is asking you to use the Pythagoras theorem. The very first step is to write the formula that you'll be using, and you might think that's a bit silly because all of them are going to be the Pythagoras theorem for this type of question. But we'll be doing some different measurement problems soon, and you'll have different formulas for those. So it's important to first of all identify that it is Pythagoras and then write down the rule that you're going to use. So we can tell this is a, we can use the Pythagoras theorem for this problem because it is a right-angled triangle and we're trying to find the longest side, the hypotenuse. So we can write out the formula we're going to use: a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Step number 2 is to ensure all the measurements are in the same units. We've got meters here, we've got meters here, so we're good to go. Step 3, draw a diagram. It's already drawn for us. And label the sides. Really important to do this so you don't get confused later on. What I mentioned above, the longest side is the first one we label. That is always the C. And once you've labelled the C, you can make the other two, A and B. Doesn't matter which order you choose to write them in. Step 4, substitute your measurements into our formula here. So instead of A, I'm going to write 10. Don't forget the squared. Instead of B, I'm going to write 5. And C will just leave as C. Step 5, calculate the equation. I'm going to write this one out by hand. Step 6, square root as your final step. So when we get here, lots of people stop and say, yep, C equals 125. But it's C squared if you look carefully. So we need to do the opposite to get rid of this little squared, so we've just got C by itself. Opposite of squared is square root. So we can say C equals the square root of 125. And this is what I was saying earlier up here. If you're asked to write an answer using exact values, then you just leave your answer like this: C equals square root of 125. That's your final answer. If you are asked, and most of the time to do with measurement, we're going to be asked to simplify it. So we need to put it into the calculator. And when we do that, we get C equals 11.18. Final step 7 down here, add correct units. Biggest number of marks are lost here with people forgetting to do this at the end. Lots of people leave it like this, forget to add the units. They're easy marks, don't lose them. We've got meters, so this is going to be in meters as well. And there's your final answer. Okay, let's take a look at how to do that on the calculator. So we've got square root of 125. We need to pull up the keyboard and press the square root button, which is up here. Type in 125, press EXE, and I've got this weird, it's called a surd because it's got a square root in the answer. Now the reason I've got that is I've got my calculator on standard mode. So if I ever get this answer and I'm looking for a decimal approximation, I can highlight it and click the decimal button up here. It will automatically turn it into a decimal, which is what I've written here. Remember, you can always highlight and turn it back again if you need to. The other thing you can do is just click down here. If you want all your answers, and you will for this want all your answers in decimal mode, so just click on standard and it will show up decimal. You can type in your square root of 125, press EXE, and it will go straight to the decimal version. For our second example, we're going to look at if you are given the longest side, the hypotenuse, and you need to find one of the other sides. So this one's slightly trickier. We still follow the same steps that we talked about above. Very first step is to identify that it's a Pythagoras question and a right angled triangle. We can see that clearly. And we need to write the formula we're going to use. So we're going to use Pythagoras' theorem, which is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Second step, make sure all the measurements are in the same units. We've got centimetres, so we're good to go. Third step, draw a diagram. Done, got one. And label the sides. Remember, first side you label is the hypotenuse. Label that as a C. Other two sides can be A and B. Doesn't matter which order they are in. Fourth step, substitute the measurements into our formula here. So for A, I've got 19.3. For B, I'm just going to leave it as a B. For C, I've got 24.2 squared. Don't forget the squared. Now, we're going to have to do a bit of arranging because we want to get the B by itself. So if we take away this from this side, we should be left with B. So I'm going to take away 19.3 squared. Take away 19.3 squared. And these two will cancel, so we're just left with B squared equals 24.2 squared minus 19.3 squared. We can do our next step, which is to calculate. So we throw this into the calculator and end up with this is still b squared. So our second last step is to square root this to get b by itself and get rid of this squared. B equals square root of 213.15. Make sure that square root sign goes across the whole number. And if you put this in your calculator, you'll get 14.60. Final step, don't forget, add your correct units. We've got centimetres, centimetres, so this is going to be centimetres. Another little shortcut here for you on the calculator. First of all, I'm going to type this one in. 24.2 squared minus 19.3 squared. Press your EXE button and you get, this is where I got the 213.15. If you now want to do the square root of this, you'll need to press your square root button, and you could type it in again, but to make that a bit faster, you can highlight this and drag it down. Make sure you drag it inside the square root and press EXE, and that will give you your answer. So that's a bit of a shortcut. Another shortcut let me just set this up. Okay, so that's our original question. Press EXE, we get our answer here. If we want to take the square root of this answer, rather than even bothering to click and drag it down, you can just press this little button down here, which will take whatever the previous answer is and slot it in there. So it's going to do the square root of this number. Press EXE and you'll get your solution. So there's a few shortcuts there to save you a bit of time if you're in a test or exam situation. Thanks for watching the video today.